The most famous ceiling in human history has been studied for 500 years, and nobody looked at the shape around God. The panel is called the creation of Adam. You know it. The finger of God reaching toward Adam, the moment before life begins. But look at what surrounds God. He is not floating freely. He is contained inside something. A billowing red and gray cloak filled with figures, pressing against him from every side. Art historians called it a cloak. They called it clouds. They called it a heavenly shroud for 500 years. Nobody asked what shape it actually was. In 1990, a physician named Frank Meshberger was sitting in his office reading a copy of JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, when he stopped at a reproduction of this panel. He was not an art historian. He was a doctor. And what he saw immediately, what no art historian had seen in 5 centuries, was a brain. Not approximately, not suggestively, precisely. The outer border of God's cloak traces the exact contour of a human brain viewed in mid-sagittal cross-section. The crease running along the top follows the sulci, the folds of the cerebral cortex. The figure pressed against God's back fits the shape of the brainstem. The green scarf hanging below, the one that no commentator had ever explained, matches the spinal cord descending from the base of the brain. Meshberger published his finding that year with anatomical diagrams placed directly over the painting. The match was not approximate, it was exact. To understand why this was not an accident, you need to understand who Michelangelo actually was. He was not simply a painter. He was a man possessed by the need to understand the human body from the inside. Beginning in his early 20s, Michelangelo secretly dissected human corpses. This was illegal. The church forbade it. The bodies were obtained from a hospital in Florence where Michelangelo had arranged quiet access in exchange for a crucifix he carved for the prior. Over the course of his life, he dissected more than 30 bodies. He studied the layers of muscle, the paths of nerves, the architecture of bone. He drew what he found with the same precision he brought to everything else. By the time Pope Julius II commissioned him to paint the Sistine Chapel ceiling in 1508, Michelangelo understood human anatomy better than most physicians of his era. He did not make mistakes about the shape of a brain. Look at the panel again, the outer contour. The interior figures arrange exactly where the major structures of the brain sit. The green scarf, unexplained for 500 years, hanging precisely where the spinal cord would descend. And then consider what is happening inside this brain. God is reaching outward. His finger extends toward Adam, toward the figure of a man lying on the earth, passive, waiting. In Michelangelo's image, the divine impulse, the moment of creation, of life, of consciousness, originates inside a human brain. Not from the sky, not from a throne, from a mind. Meshberger's discovery prompted other researchers to look more carefully at the rest of the ceiling. In a later panel, the separation of light from darkness, another physician identified a second hidden structure. In this panel, God is shown from below, arms raised, face tilted upward. And inside the folds of God's neck, rendered with exact anatomical accuracy, is the human brainstem. 2 panels, 2 hidden anatomical structures, the same ceiling. The same painter who spent 4 years on his back on scaffolding, who fought with the Pope about the commission, who said repeatedly that he was a sculptor forced against his will to paint. That painter embedded the architecture of the human mind into the holiest ceiling in Christendom. The church never responded to Meshberger's finding. There is no record of any official reaction. No acknowledgement, no denial. Which leaves the question open in a way that feels entirely deliberate. Michelangelo was painting for an institution that controlled what could be said, what could be thought, what could be known. Dissecting human bodies was a sin. Suggesting that God lived inside the human mind, rather than above it, would have been something far worse. So he said it the only way he could. He painted it into the ceiling where no one could read it for 500 years. The man who was told what to paint, where to paint it, and how long it should take, used that ceiling to say something the church would never have permitted him to say out loud. And then he waited. I would love to know what you think in the comments. Whether you believe Michelangelo placed these structures deliberately, as a private message, a philosophical statement, a quiet act of defiance, or whether his knowledge of anatomy had become so deep, so completely part of how he saw the human form, that it came through his hand without him fully knowing why. See you in the next video.